The Arden Academy floated silently above the planet Viralia, a massive structure of steel and glass that glimmered in the light of distant stars. From the outside, it looked like a jewel in the blackness of space, but inside, tension buzzed like electricity. The Academy trained the galaxy's most promising cadets, students of every race and species, preparing them to protect their worlds from threats no one dared ignore. Today, however, the usual calm precision was replaced with excitement and unease. The students had been given a challenge unlike any before: forge a blade. That could tip the balance of war. In a central hall, a vast chamber lined with forges and workbenches, the students gathered. Holographic diagrams of weapons rotated in the air above the tables, showing advanced alloys and plasma cores glowing with energy. The instructor, Tharkun, a towering Zalari with armored skin and multiple eyes that gleamed like molten metal, strode among the cadets. His voice, deep and commanding, echoed across the hall. Today, you will forge weapons that can cut through the mightiest of enemies. You will shape the tools that decide who lives and who dies. His gaze swept across the students, lingering briefly on each alien species with its strange, delicate or muscular hands. Every strike, every spark counts. Fail, and our fleet will suffer. Understand? A chorus of nods and murmurs spread across the room. Most cadets felt a thrill, their excitement tempered by the pressure. Their species had trained for this, practiced in energy manipulation, metallurgy, and combat simulation. But among them stood Lyra, a human girl whose presence seemed almost fragile in comparison to the others. She had no natural strength like the Zalari or long, dexterous claws like the Kirelians. Her hands were small, unarmored, and delicate. Yet her eyes were sharp, scanning the workbench with a quiet focus. The other students prepared their metals, mixing alloys that shone like liquid fire, charging cores with pulses of plasma energy, and hammering steel into edges that could cut through armor. Sparks flew and the room hummed with heat and energy. Each cadet worked quickly, driven by pride, fear, and determination. They knew that the tests would soon be more than just for grades. They might soon face a real battle. Lyra, however, did not touch the glowing metals or the humming cores. Instead, she reached into her satchel and pulled out a jagged piece of bone. It was worn, weathered, and seemed insignificant compared to the shining materials around her. The other cadets glanced at her, confused and amused. Some snickered quietly, whispering to one another about the foolish human who refused to use proper materials. Tharkun's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer, his massive form towering over Lyra. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice carrying authority and disbelief. "Do you think you can forge a weapon from bone while others work with steel and plasma? This is no time for childish games." Lyra looked up at him calmly. Her voice was quiet but firm. "I know what I'm doing." Tharkun hesitated for a moment, not accustomed to being questioned by a human, especially one so small. The cadets around them stared in disbelief. Even those who had faced countless dangers in training seemed unsure of what to make of her choice. But Lyra did not waver. She laid the bone on her bench and began to work. Hours passed. While other cadets hammered and shaped metals, their tools sparking and clanging, Lyra worked methodically. She carved fine lines into the bone, sharpened its edges with careful precision, and reinforced it with small bindings and alien resins she had acquired in secret. Her movements were quiet and controlled, almost meditative, as if she were speaking to the material with her hands. She was not fast, but each action was deliberate and exact. The other cadets grew frustrated, some impatiently tapping at their glowing blades, while others whispered among themselves. "She's wasting time," one Zalari muttered, glaring at Lyra's simple piece of bone. "It will break the moment it meets armor. She will embarrass herself and the class." Lyra ignored them. Her focus never wavered. She worked not with force, but with care and ingenuity. Where the metals relied on power, her blade relied on balance and precision. Where the other cadets depended on raw energy, she depended on understanding. By the time the day drew near its end, while the other students had completed magnificent steel and plasma swords that shimmered with deadly light, Lyra held a simple, jagged blade of bone. Yet it was perfect in its way. The carvings traced delicate patterns along the edge, and the tip gleamed with a strange, almost living sheen. Just as the cadets prepared to display their creations for inspection, alarms blared throughout the station. Red lights flashed and the walls shook as the station's sensors picked up a fleet emerging from Virelia's orbit. The Virelians, a fearsome insectoid species with jagged claws and energy cannons, were approaching fast. Panic spread instantly. The cadets grabbed their forged weapons and rushed to the docking bays. The metallic blades hummed and flared as they tried to channel energy through their weapons. Yet when the Virelian scouts fired, the energy shields around the cadets flickered and failed. Some of the heavier armored species fell back, struggling against the alien onslaught. Fear rippled through the ranks as the true scale of the threat became clear. Lyra stood silently, gripping her bone blade. She felt the station shudder beneath her feet as the first blast struck. Around her, chaos erupted, cadets shouting, aliens screaming, and alarms blaring. Yet she remained calm, almost eerily so. She tested the edge of her bone blade against a fragment of metal, and it cut cleanly, almost as if it had been made for this moment. The other cadets noticed her. They paused for a fraction of a second, curiosity mixing with disbelief. Tharkun barked orders, calling for them to follow standard tactics, but the human girl did not move. Instead, she took a deep breath and stepped forward toward the advancing alien fleet, her small frame moving with confidence and certainty. In that instant, the cadets realized something remarkable. This human girl, dismissed and underestimated, might be the one with the key to survival. While the others relied on raw power, she had relied on understanding, ingenuity, and an uncheckable will. In a room full of the galaxy's strongest warriors, it was not the size or strength of the weapon that mattered, it was the hand and mind that wielded it. As Lyra advanced toward the docking bay, ready to face the Virelians head-on, the other cadets exchanged uncertain glances. Some hesitation remained, but a spark of hope ignited. Perhaps, just perhaps, humanity's ingenuity, courage, and determination could turn the tide against the approaching doom. The battle was about to begin, and the first strike would not come from steel or plasma but from bone. The Virelian fleet loomed like a shadow over the Arden Academy. Their ships were jagged, blackened structures that pulsed with alien energy, each vessel bristling with weapons and armor to withstand even the strongest attacks. The station shuddered as the first volleys of energy cannon fire struck its outer hull, sending shockwaves rattling through the corridors. The cadets scrambled to defensive positions, their previously forged weapons trembling in their hands as the alien onslaught bore down. The human fighters, smaller and seemingly fragile compared to the massive alien ships, dodged desperately, weaving between bursts of plasma fire, but many were struck, thrown into walls or airlocks by the sheer force of the blasts. Amid the chaos, Lyra stood alone, her bone blade shining faintly in the dim red emergency lights. Her movements were precise, almost deliberate, as if she could see the pattern of the battle in her mind before it happened. When a group of Virelian soldiers burst through the station's doors, claws extended and energy shields humming, she met them head-on. The first strike she made was lightning fast. The bone blade bit cleanly into the alien armor, slicing through as if it were paper. The soldiers staggered, their screeches echoing in the corridor. One tried to strike her with a massive claw, but she rolled beneath it, slicing upward and sending him crashing into a wall. The other cadets paused, watching in stunned silence. No one had expected a human, so small and unarmored, to move with such speed and precision. Some had never seen a blade steel, plasma, or bone cut through the Virelian armor so cleanly. A spark of hope ignited among them, even as the battle raged around them. Tharkun barked orders, trying to organize a counterattack. But his deep voice was drowned out by the sounds of alarms and explosions. Seeing the gap in the Virelian formation, Lyra ran through the corridors of the station, using her small size to move faster than anyone else. She leapt from broken catwalk to catwalk, using gravity shifts to glide across zero-gravity sections, landing precisely where she was needed most. She found injured cadets trapped under debris and freed them, guiding them toward safe zones. Every movement was calculated and efficient, and yet it carried a kind of grace. She struck with her blade only when necessary, avoiding unnecessary fights while ensuring that every action inflicted maximum damage on the enemy. Her actions inspired the other cadets. Seeing the human girl carve a path through enemies, they began to improvise. One Zalori cadet, whose plasma sword had been damaged in the initial strike, reworked his weapon by linking it to a damaged energy core. When he swung, it released pulses of force that knocked Virelian soldiers off balance. Another cadet, a Kirelian with long, nimble limbs, rewired a section of the station's fusion generator to emit an electromagnetic pulse, temporarily scrambling the enemy ship's targeting systems. The cadets began to work as one, not relying solely on the pre-planned strategies of their instructors, but adapting, learning, and improvising under pressure. The battle moved from the station to the void of space. As the Virelians tried to board the station's docking bays, human fighters launched from the hangars, small but agile ships that weaved through energy, fire, and debris. Lyra climbed into one briefly, directing a squad of pilots toward a weak point in the Virelian formation. She used precise calculations and intuition to guide them, turning their smaller size and speed into an advantage against the hulking alien vessels. Explosions lit the black sky as torpedoes struck the enemy, and the cries of cadets echoed over the comms. Blending fear with determination, Lyra's ultimate goal became clear: the bridge of the Virelian flagship. It was there that the alien warlord commanded the fleet, and defeating him could collapse their strategy entirely. She fought her way through boarding parties, each strike of her bone blade cutting through armor and energy shields alike. She moved like a shadow, disappearing and reappearing, her enemies unable to anticipate her next move. When a massive Virelian soldier attempted to trap her, she vaulted over its claw and sliced across the joints of its limbs, immobilizing it without wasting time. Every action was deliberate, every movement calculated. The human ingenuity of the station worked hand in hand with Lyra's precision. Sensors and cameras patched together from damaged consoles allowed her to see the movement of enemies before they appeared. Explosive traps were set in corridors, redirecting alien forces into confined spaces where they could be neutralized more efficiently. Even the damaged hull sections of the station became weapons, as gravity shifts and controlled decompressions were used strategically to disable boarding parties. It was chaos, but a controlled chaos born of intellect and courage. Finally, Lyra reached the central bridge. The warlord awaited, a massive creature covered in black chitin, each limb tipped with deadly spikes and claws, eyes glowing with cruel intelligence. It towered over her, its presence filling the room with menace. "You are nothing, human," it hissed, voice like grinding metal. "Your weapons cannot harm me. Your courage is meaningless." Lyra did not speak. She studied its movements, watching for patterns, timing, and weaknesses. When it lunged, she rolled to the side, her bone blade flashing like lightning. She struck, aiming for the small gaps in its armor where its joints and underplates were exposed. Sparks flew, claws scraped against walls, and the bridge trembled under the weight of their struggle. Each strike was precise, calculated to disable, not merely wound. She used momentum and leverage, striking with agility rather than brute force. The warlord swiped at her with a massive claw, but she flipped over it, bringing her blade down with precision into its chest. Finding a vital weak point she had identified moments before, the warlord screamed, staggering back as energy leaked from its armor. Its fleet faltered, confusion spreading among the ships as communication with their leader was disrupted. The Varelian soldiers hesitated, unsure of what to do without guidance. The human fleet, seeing the opening, rallied with renewed courage, attacking the alien vessels with coordinated strikes that exploited the confusion Lyra had created. Explosions rippled across the void, ships breaking apart in bursts of fire and debris. Even as the warlord fell, Lyra did not pause. She continued to protect the cadets, guide fighters, and dismantle enemy resistance. Every action reinforced the lesson that had already begun to spread among the students. It was not the strength or size of a species that determined victory, but the mind, courage, and will to act. The human girl, underestimated and mocked, had become the key to turning the tide of battle, proving that determination and ingenuity could stand against overwhelming force. By the time the fighting subsided, the Varelian fleet had been scattered. Their ships limped away, damaged and disorganized, leaving the station battered but intact. The cadets, exhausted, bruised, and wounded, gathered around Lyra, looking at her with awe and newfound respect. Tharkun approached, his massive frame weary from battle, and studied her silently for a moment. Then he bowed slightly, a rare gesture of respect. "You were right," he said quietly. "It was never the metal or the energy. It was the hand and mind that wielded it." Lyra nodded, still catching her breath. Her small human frame had carried the weight of the fight, but she had survived, and in doing so, she had proven something far greater than skill alone. She had shown that humans could adapt, think, and overcome even the most impossible odds. The station was in ruins, the cadets were battered, but hope had been restored. Humanity had fought, and humanity had survived. The battle was over, but its effects would ripple across the galaxy. The Varelians had learned that underestimating humans was a grave mistake. The cadets had learned the true value of ingenuity and courage. And Lyra, holding her bone blade now scarred with marks of combat, realized that sometimes the smallest and simplest tools, guided by the sharpest minds and bravest hearts, could shape the destiny of entire worlds. The silence after the battle felt strange, almost unreal. The Varelian fleet had retreated, their ships limping through the void, leaving trails of damaged engines and shattered shields behind them. The Arden Academy hung in orbit over Veralia like a battered but defiant sentinel, its hull scorched, corridors wrecked, and emergency lights casting long red shadows over the broken metal floors. Smoke curled from ruptured sections, and the occasional sparks from ruptured wiring sparked in the air. For the cadets, the fight had taken everything from them: their energy, their strength, and for some, their hope. And yet, amidst the wreckage and exhaustion, a sense of triumph lingered in the air. Fragile but undeniable, Lyra stood on the edge of the docking bay, bone blade in hand, its surface marked with scratches and dents from countless strikes. The weapon still glowed faintly, a soft, living light that reflected in her sharp eyes. Around her, the other cadets moved like ghosts, some attending to wounded friends, others inspecting their damaged weapons or trying to restore the station systems. She could see Tharkun moving slowly through the debris, his massive form battered but still commanding respect. His eyes, which usually burned with the fire of authority, were now tempered with something else: admiration and perhaps understanding. The human girl had become the symbol of resilience. Her small size had been no obstacle. Her unarmored body had carried her through the fiercest fights, and her mind had guided others to improvise and survive. As she walked down the broken corridors, she saw the results of her efforts. Cadets who had been frozen with fear now moved with purpose, coordinating repairs and tending to the injured. The station, though damaged, was still standing, and so was their spirit. Lyra's thoughts turned to the Virelian warlord she had faced at the bridge. Its black chitin had seemed nearly impervious, its strength unmatched, and yet, with careful observation, precision strikes, and unwavering courage, she had found its weakness. That victory had not been a simple matter of brute force, it had been the product of patience, intelligence, and instinct. The warlord's fall had sent a shock wave through the enemy fleet, turning the tide of battle and scattering their forces. Every human fighter, every cadet who had watched or fought, had witnessed that one undeniable truth: humans, even small and underestimated, could achieve greatness under pressure. As Lyra made her way to the command center, she found groups of cadets gathered around, discussing what to do next. Some were exhausted, their faces pale and drawn, while others bore smiles of cautious relief. One of the Corellian cadets approached, still limping from a wound across her shoulder, and looked at Lyra with something like awe. "I thought we would fall," she admitted quietly. "But you turned everything around. How did you do it?" Lyra simply shook her head and smiled faintly. "I didn't do it alone. Everyone found a way to fight, to adapt. I just led the way." Her words were humble, but there was an undeniable strength behind them. Leadership was not about size or strength. It was about vision, courage, and the willingness to act when others hesitated. Tharkun finally reached her, his massive frame looming over hers. His multifaceted eyes softened, and for a moment the cadets held their breath, unsure of what the great Zilari warrior might say. Then, in a rare gesture, he knelt slightly, lowering his head. "You were right," he said, his deep voice calm but filled with weight. "It was never the steel or plasma that mattered. It was the hand that wielded it, the mind that guided it, and the courage to strike when others hesitated. You have shown the strength of humans, and for that I honor you." Lyra nodded, feeling a warmth of pride she had never allowed herself before. She had always known humans were underestimated, often dismissed by larger, stronger, or more advanced species. But in this battle, she had proved that intelligence, ingenuity, and courage could surpass brute force and superior technology. Humans could adapt, survive, and triumph even against enemies that seemed impossible to defeat. The station's alarms had quieted, and emergency teams began stabilizing the damaged systems. Cadets coordinated to seal breached sections, reroute energy, and restore communication with the remaining human fleet. Through all the chaos, Lyra's presence was steady, her calm determination inspiring those around her. She moved from group to group, checking on the wounded, helping where she could, and offering guidance where it was needed most. Her small hands held a presence far larger than her size, a beacon of hope in the wreckage. Hours passed, and the initial relief was replaced by reflection. The cost of the battle was heavy. Several cadets had been injured or worse. Parts of the station were beyond repair, the hull scarred and weakened. Supplies were low, and the fleet remained scattered and battered. Yet, in the midst of loss, there was a profound sense of achievement. Humanity had faced an overwhelming enemy and survived. Humanity had shown that its spirit could not be broken. And at the heart of that victory stood Lyra, a single human girl who had wielded a simple bone blade to reshape the fate of an entire battle. As she walked to the observation deck, overlooking the damaged fleet and the distant stars, She thought about the enormity of what had happened. The galaxy was vast, filled with threats and dangers that no single species could handle alone. Yet, the human capacity to adapt, to innovate, and to fight with courage could tip the balance even when odds seemed impossible. Lyra knew this was just one battle in a much larger war. But she also knew that it had proven something essential. Humans were a force that could not be ignored, underestimated, or dismissed. She held her bone blade in her hands, tracing the marks left from combat. Each scratch, each dent, told a story of survival, determination, and ingenuity. Unlike the glowing plasma or polished steel of other weapons, this simple piece of bone had carried the weight of a galaxy's hope. And in that weight, Lyra understood her role not as a warrior defined by size or species, but as a human defined by heart, mind, and courage. In the days that followed, the cadets repaired the station, shared stories of bravery, and remembered the sacrifices of those who had fallen. Lyra's actions became the subject of whispered conversations and wide-eyed admiration. The human girl who had sharpened bone in a world of steel had become a symbol of resilience, a living example of what humans could achieve. Across the galaxy, the tale spread quietly at first, then louder, inspiring other humans, allies, and even some aliens to believe that intelligence and courage could rival brute strength. The Varelians, scattered and beaten, retreated to the edges of known space. Their arrogance had been shattered, their assumption that humans were weak proven false. And in their retreat, they would remember the small, unassuming human who had turned a simple blade of bone into a weapon that could cut through the strongest of foes. Lyra, exhausted but unbowed, finally sat on the edge of a repaired section of the station, watching the stars twinkle beyond the observation windows. The galaxy was dangerous, and the war was far from over, but humanity had shown it could endure, adapt, and triumph. Her thoughts drifted to the future, to the challenges yet to come, and she smiled faintly. One human had proven the value of courage and ingenuity, and one day, humanity as a whole would continue to shape the galaxy with the same determination. As the first light of distant suns reflected across the station's metal, Lyra whispered to herself, a quiet vow that carried weight far beyond the room she sat in. In the darkest moments, humans shine brightest. And we will never stop. The words were simple, yet they carried a power that no weapon could match, a promise of resilience, ingenuity, and courage that would echo across the stars. The battle was over. The sacrifices had been made, and the victory was hard-earned. But humanity's story had only just begun. And in that story, the human girl who had sharpened a piece of bone would forever stand as a symbol of what it meant to fight, survive, and triumph against impossible odds.